Okay, hi, it's Dave Morris again, morrisstudios.ca. This little video is going to be very technical. It has to do with color space. Yes, that terrible thing, color space, also ICC profiles. So let's just get into it first. And what I'm showing you here is actually the color space. They kind of do a 3D representation to show color space that you get. And now first, the reason we're going through this is because color space is enormously important when you talk digital and photos. Because unlike film, which basically you always had all the colors because it was film, now with digital, every time you open your photograph, you do something to the color. And it asks all kinds of questions that nobody knows anything about. So I'm going to help you out just a little bit. Okay. sRGB color space is the default color space for all digital color. It's a very bad color space. There's a big history to why there's a color space. You can probably listen to some of my podcasts. We'll get into it there. But it's too long and drawn out to do here. But sRGB color space is very small. Here's the 3D representation. To quickly go ahead and show you a better color space, let's show you Adobe RGB. And now it grows and you get that much more color. Okay, so let's just set this to comparison and bring this across to sRGB. And there you go. All the white area is what you lose every time you open a file, and it's open in sRGB color space. And once the file is stripped of that color, it's gone. It doesn't ever come back. So it's a very bad thing, especially considering now we're kind of in the springtime, and greens is the big place it gets clipped. So all those beautiful greens you're seeing and you're out there taking some photographs. Well, if you shoot with your camera, we're going to start at the camera. If you shoot with your camera and you shoot JPEG files, by default, your camera is set to sRGB. So the very first thing that happens every time you take a picture is all your greens disappear. You don't know they disappear. They just do disappear. And you're left with a very limited amount of greens. So the very first thing that I want you to do is run to your digital camera and immediately reset the color space in your digital camera to Adobe RGB. They all have it. By default, it is sRGB, but what you want is the Adobe RGB. And then you'll get much more in your green colors, which would be nice considering you want to see green. Okay, so that's step one. Step two is if you open any of your files in Adobe Photoshop, Apple Aperture, probably Lightroom, Adobe Lightroom, I'm going to assume Elements. Their color space is also defaulted to sRGB, which when you think about it is insane because they're Adobe Photoshop, Lightroom, Aperture from Apple are all pro applications. And by default, they select the smallest possible color space. So here's your scenario. You've shot your images, but you are more advanced, so you shoot your images in RAW. Yay, RAW, great. Import them into Adobe Aperture, or sorry, Apple Aperture, let's say. Yay, great. And then you go to export it to Photoshop to do something. Ooh, bad, because all that extra color that you gathered in RAW, which means it's a RAW file, it hasn't been clipped in any way, nothing has been thrown away. Now suddenly it gets all thrown away. Because in Adobe Photoshop, the default color space is sRGB. So step number two is immediately put down your camera, immediately go to your pro applications and immediately change the color space. Now, what's the best color space once you get on the computer? Well, this is the one that's generally accepted to be number one by most pro shooters, and it is Pro Photo. And there you go. A wee bit on the large side for color. which is excellent. So let's just get rid of all this comparison. And there you go. Okay. Now we want to stay in RGB. There's no question. In Photoshop, you'll see that you have a CMYK thing. We'll just quickly go to CMYK and see how small CMYK is for color. So don't ever do anything in CMYK. Even if you look at your printer and the inks come as CMYK inks, do not convert your image ever to CMYK. The only time you use CMYK is if you're sending your stuff to a pro printer, like as in a catalog printer. Okay? Never CMYK. Generally speaking, the only people that convert to CMYK are the people that know they have to convert to CMYK. How's that? That's the easier way to say it. Okay, so let's just hold this for comparison. This is the RGB Pro Photo Color Space, and now we'll do that. Boom. See how much more color you have available? Now, the reason this is important to do is because your printers now, even your home printers, are being able to print more and more and more colors. Mostly because now they handle, 62 different ink wells that you constantly have to replace. But the bottom line is they are handling more and more color. And if you strip away the color, you can't get it back. So two things: set your camera to Adobe RGB if you're going to shoot JPEG, because generally accepted, that's okay. If you're going to shoot RAW, which of course is better, but then you have those other things, but basically RAW is fine, then you want to set your color space to Adobe RGB, because that's the biggest color space I know of that you can use. So there you go, just a quick little introductory video to color space and ICC profiles. I will be doing more because this is enormously important, and it's very hard to find anybody that explains it well. I hope I did, and basically tells you what you should do so that you end up with the best color for your photographs. Again, Dave Morris, morrisstudios.ca.